which is why what happened that day still leaves me at a loss for words. Started like any other day. I went downstairs to grab some water and found my brother standing in the kitchen. As we stood there, I casually asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" He shook his head, but then he surprised me by sharing a story about something he thought could be paranormal. It wasn't like him to say things like that, so I got curious. After he finished, I looked at him and asked, "Did you ever try to scare me when I came home from school?" I had planned on telling him something that had been bothering me for years, but his answer threw me off. He simply said, "No, but one time I shot a Nerf gun at you while you were on the computer. That's probably the only time I tried to mess with you." I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't what I was talking about at all. I did remember the Nerf gun incident, but it was nothing compared to what I was about to tell him. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to go ahead and tell him what had been on my mind. It all happened when I was in 7th grade, not long after the school year started. I had come home one day, like I always did, and headed straight to my bedroom. I set my backpack down on my bed, grabbed my earbuds, and settled in to watch some YouTube videos. My mom called me not long after I got home, just to let me know that my brother was heading out to a friend's house for the evening. Both my parents were working late that night, so I knew I'd be home alone. I was always a pretty quiet kid, especially when I was by myself. I had this irrational fear that someone could be in the house with me, and if I made too much noise, they'd find me. I know it sounds silly, but that's how I felt. As long as I stayed quiet, I felt safe. At some point, I paused my video and went to the bathroom. Our house has a strange layout, so let me try to explain. If you're standing in the bathroom, facing the door, and you step out, you can turn left and reach my brother's room at the end of a short hallway. If you turn right, you'd be heading toward the staircase. The stairs are split in the middle by a small landing, and then they continue down to the main floor. At the bottom of the stairs is the front door, and we had an alarm system that would announce if any door or window was opened. Anyway, I was in the bathroom, just about to flush the toilet, when I heard a loud thud coming from my brother's room. I figured he must be getting ready to leave for his friend's house, so I didn't think much of it. I flushed the toilet and washed my hands, but the house had gone completely still. It was an eerie kind of silence, the kind that makes you feel like something is off. I started to feel uneasy, like someone was watching me. My stomach twisted with fear, but I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I stood there, frozen, waiting for another sound, something that would tell me I wasn't alone. But nothing happened. I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't text my brother to check if he was still home. There was a house phone in the bathroom, but it made a loud noise when you dialed, and I didn't want to risk it. Just then, I heard it muttering, coming from my brother's room. But it wasn't his voice. It wasn't even close. The voice was deep, low, and hard to make out, but I could tell it was speaking. The way it hissed and whispered certain sounds like S and T sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't understand what it was saying, but it made me feel like I was in danger. Then, I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming from my brother's room, moving down the hallway towards me. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly stepped away from the bathroom door and pressed myself against the window, trying to figure out an escape plan. If whoever it was broke in, I thought maybe I could get out through the window. Fighting wasn't an option. I was just a scrawny 7th grader. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from breathing too loudly, hoping they wouldn't know I was in the bathroom. The footsteps got closer and closer, and then they stopped, right outside the bathroom door. My body froze in terror. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for it to burst open. But instead of trying to come in, the footsteps started again, this time heading toward the staircase. I heard them crash down the stairs, hitting the landing with a loud thud before continuing to the main floor. Then the muttering stopped. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had left. I heard the front door open and close, and the alarm went off, announcing the door had been opened. But just as I started to relax, thinking it was safe, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. There was a violent banging coming from the small laundry chute in the bathroom. The chute led to the laundry room on the main floor, and it was far too small for anyone to fit through. but the pounding was relentless, like someone was jabbing at it with something sharp, maybe a broom handle. The door to the chute vibrated with each hit, and I stood there, paralyzed, praying it wouldn't burst open. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the pounding stopped. I didn't move. I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours, terrified to open the door. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I quietly crept back to my room and called my parents. They didn't pick up. I spent the rest of the evening huddled in my room, holding the doorknob tightly because my door didn't have a lock. When my parents finally got home, I told them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought I had just imagined it. My brother came home later that night, and when I told him, he doubted me too. He brushed it off, saying it was probably nothing. But as I told him this story now, his expression changed. His mouth dropped open, and for the first time, he looked genuinely freaked out. He confessed that he used to hear strange noises coming from the attic, which had an entrance right in his bedroom. Neither of us can figure out what happened that day, and honestly, I try not to think about it too much. But I'll never forget that feeling of terror, standing in that bathroom, waiting for whatever was on the other side of the door. My name's Alyssa, and I was 16 years old when this all happened. I lived with my mom in a small, rundown apartment in the Bronx, New York. Living in the Bronx was definitely something, though not the kind of experience I'd call a good one. The streets were always full of shady characters, and I never felt safe walking around, especially at night. Our apartment was tiny, and our neighbors were strange, to say the least. I'm not even exaggerating when I say they gave me the creeps. Our apartment was on the 7th floor, almost at the very end of a long hallway. The apartment next to ours belonged to this old man who I couldn't help but feel uneasy around. Every day, he would sit outside his door, right on the windowsill, as if he had nothing better to do with his time. And every single time I came home, even if I was with my mom, he would stare at me with this blank, emotionless expression that made my skin crawl. My mom warned me to stay away from him. We never knew his name, but I'll never forget what he looked like. He was a man in his 60s, black with thinning gray hair, and that same lifeless look in his eyes. At first, he didn't say much, but then one day he started greeting me whenever I walked by. "Hi, Alyssa," he would say, but here's the weird part. He called me by my name. I had no idea how he knew my name, and honestly, I didn't want to know. I never asked him how he found out, and I didn't plan on sticking around to find out either. One night, things took a turn for the worse. My mom was working the night shift, which meant I'd be home alone. I got back to the apartment around 9 p.m., and like always, the creepy neighbor was sitting there on the windowsill, just watching. This time, instead of his usual, "Hi," he asked me something that sent chills down my spine. "Is your mom working tonight?" Looking back now, I can't believe how stupid I was. I was so caught off guard that I just nodded without even thinking about it. He nodded back, slowly, not saying another word. I quickly unlocked the door, stepped inside, and shut it behind me, trying to shake off the uneasiness. I'd had enough of him for one night. Once inside, I tried to calm myself down by going through my usual routine. I washed up a bit, had a snack, did some laundry, and then jumped in the shower. That's when things started to get strange. As I was rinsing off, I heard a weird grumbling noise. It was low and unsettling, like nothing I'd ever heard before. I froze for a second, trying to figure out what it could be. My first thought was that someone might be in the apartment with me. Worried, I quickly got out of the shower, threw on the clothes I'd brought into the bathroom, and stepped out to investigate. The noise seemed to be coming from my bedroom. I searched every corner of my room, checking the closet, under the bed, anywhere someone could hide, but there was no one there. Then something caught my eye. It was a small hole in the wall, so tiny I almost didn't notice it at first. I knelt down to get a closer look, my curiosity overpowering my fear. And then I saw it. On the other side of that hole, I saw an eye, a human eye staring right back at me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, terrified by what I'd just seen. Someone had been watching me through that hole, and that someone was my creepy neighbor. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wall separated our apartment from his. That meant he had drilled a hole through the wall to spy on me. And that wasn't all. I suddenly remembered the strange noise I'd heard while I was in the shower. My stomach churned as I rushed back to the bathroom to check. Sure enough, I found another small hole, just like the one in my bedroom, positioned in a way that would let someone see into the shower. Couldn't believe it. He'd been watching me in the bathroom too. I was shaking as I grabbed my phone and called my mom. I explained everything, my voice trembling as I told her about the holes in the walls and the eye I had seen. As I was on the phone, there was a loud knock on the apartment door. I froze. It was him. The neighbor was standing outside, banging on the door and shouting, "Open the door right now. I didn't drill those holes." His voice was angry and desperate, and I could hear his fists pounding against the door. My mom was frantic on the other end of the line. "Call the police. Right now," she urged me, telling me she'd get home as fast as she could. I hung up and dialed 911, my hands shaking as I tried to explain what was happening. Thankfully, one good thing about living in the Bronx is that the police response time is fast. Within 5 minutes, cops were at my door, and the neighbor was nowhere to be found. When my mom got home half an hour later, she was furious. She pressed charges against the neighbor for stalking, invasion of privacy, and criminal mischief. The apartment building management patched up the holes at his expense, and he was evicted from the building. I'll never forget the feeling of terror I experienced that night, knowing that someone had been watching me in my own home, invading my privacy in the most violating way possible. Even though he's gone, the memory of those eyes staring through that tiny hole still haunts me to this day. I'll never forget the time my friend Hal and I went on a camping trip. Hal, being an Eagle Scout and a big lover of the outdoors, was always out camping. One day, I decided to join him, curious to see what all the fuss was about. Hal's girlfriend, Maya, came along as well, and I got a last-minute invite. We carpooled together, and after about 3 hours of driving, we reached our destination. Hal didn't believe in typical campsites because he thought they didn't provide the real camping experience. He preferred being out in the wild, far away from other people. So he took us down this random dirt trail off a deserted road that he knew about. We drove deep into the woods for a few minutes before Hal decided we'd found the perfect spot. He parked the car, and at first, I didn't even realize we were getting out there. It was such a hidden place. We unpacked the trunk, which was filled with tents, sleeping bags, food, toilet paper, and first aid supplies. Hal said he usually packed lighter, but he wanted this trip to be easier for Maya and me, whatever that meant. Once we found a good spot, Hal gave us tasks. Setting up tents was something I could handle, so he left me in charge of that. Maya stayed with me to help a little, while also unpacking the other supplies. Meanwhile, Hal went off to find firewood. He kept coming back with a few pieces at a time. Before we knew it, nightfall crept up on us. Luckily, Hal had collected enough wood to get a nice fire going. The tents were up, and we gathered around the fire, drinking and reminiscing. Most of the stories were from when Hal and I hung out before Maya was around, and I could tell she wasn't too interested. After a while, she got tired of the conversation and went to her tent to sleep. Hal and I stayed up a little longer, but we kept our voices down so we wouldn't disturb her. Eventually, I finished my last beer and started to feel it. Hal and I were still talking when, all of a sudden, he told me to be quiet. I heard it too, footsteps in the distance, just beyond the light of the fire. Hal, always calm in nature, told me it was probably just a deer. But when I nervously asked, "What if it's a bear?" he reassured me that no bear would come near a campfire or the sound of people. I wasn't so sure, and when I asked again, Hal didn't answer. The footsteps were slow but steady, and they seemed to be circling us, getting a little closer with each pass. Then we started to hear this strange sound. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before, a sort of clicking, growling noise. I whispered, "Is that a wolf?" But Hal didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for me to get into my tent. I didn't argue. I hurried into the tent I had set up for myself, while Hal went to the one he shared with Maya. The clicking noise outside grew louder, clearer, and much more unnerving. It didn't sound like any creature I could imagine. The light from the fire cast strange shadows on the tent walls, and I had to bite my lip to stop myself from screaming when I saw something truly terrifying. A huge, bipedal figure walked slowly past my tent, its heavy footsteps pounding the ground with each step. I couldn't see exactly what it was, but the shadow alone was enough to send my heart racing. It moved away from my tent and toward Hal and Maya's. I stayed frozen, holding my breath. Then, suddenly Maya screamed, a blood-curdling scream that made my blood run cold. I heard Hal shouting for her to run, and within seconds, they were both outside, racing away. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of my tent and followed them into the pitch-black forest, with no flashlight and no idea where we were going. All I knew was that we were being chased by something, and its footsteps were right behind me. Somehow, through sheer luck, Hal led us back to the car. We scrambled in, and without looking back, Hal floored it. He drove down the dirt trail for a short while before we hit a dead end. Panic set in as he had to turn the truck around, and I was terrified that whatever was chasing us would catch up. I begged him to turn off the headlights so it wouldn't see us, but Hal insisted he needed them to avoid hitting trees. I sat in the back seat, gripping the door, staring out into the darkness, afraid I might see that creature at any second. Finally, Hal got the truck turned around, and we sped out of there. We left everything behind. Tents, supplies, all of it. There was no way we were going back. Later, Hal explained what happened. While they were in the tent, they heard heavy breathing and felt something pressing against the tent, trying to tear it open. To this day, Hal says he has never seen or heard anything like it in his life. We don't know what it was, but it definitely wasn't human. It walked on two legs, but its size and the sounds it made were beyond anything we could explain. Some experiences stay with you forever, and this was one of them. Everyone has one truly terrifying, unexplainable moment in their life, and this was ours.